Hi everyone, welcome to today's coffee chat. My name is Daniel Chuckenbrough and I'm a marketing assistant at Brooks Publishing. And I'm happy to have Eileen Schwartz with us today to discuss enhancing remote instruction with the building blocks framework. So before we get started, I just have a few things to go over. Eileen, if you could go to the next slide. So first, we have a few webinar tips. If you have any applications that are open, such as email or other web browsers, if you close those, that can increase bandwidth for this webinar. If you have any questions, there is a questions tab in the webinar panel, and you can type your questions into that tab. And then at the end of this webinar, we'll be doing a Q&A session, so we'll take those questions at the end. If you'd like to minimize your webinar panel, there's a little orange arrow up at the top of the panel. You can click that and that'll minimize the panel. And then if you click it again, that'll expand the panel. And if you're having any audio issues during the webinar, there's an audio tab as well. And if you click that, there'll be options for adjusting your audio, either your speaker output, or you can dial in using your phone. And there's instructions to dial in using your phone under that panel. Could you go to the next slide, Eileen? So Eileen Schwartz is a co-author of the Building Blocks for Teaching Preschoolers with Special Needs, 3rd edition. In this book, you will get expanded, timely content with consistent with DEC recommended practices. And this best-selling book will prepare a new generation of early childhood educators to teach and include every child. And this, the 3rd edition, was also endorsed for supporting the DEC recommended practices. So you can find more information about that book on this short URL on your screen. We are also doing a book giveaway. If you could go to the next slide, Eileen. We're giving away 3 free copies of Building Blocks for Teaching Preschoolers with Special Needs. So 3 attendees will be selected at random and emailed after the webinar. So go ahead and submit your questions to increase your chances of winning one of these copies. And at the end of the webinar, we will also have a short webinar survey. There will be a little pop-up once the webinar ends, and if you complete that survey and just let us know what you thought about this webinar, you could be entered to win a free copy of Building Blocks. And finally, we are offering certificates for this webinar. So certificates of attendance will be available for all viewers, and we'll provide a little bit of more information about certificates and how to get them at the end of the webinar. So Dr. Schwartz is a professor of special education and the director of the Herring Institute at the University of Washington. Dr. Schwartz is also the director of Project Data, which is a developmentally appropriate treatment for autism, a school-based intensive behavioral intervention program for children with autism. Dr. Schwartz has an extensive background working with young children with special needs and their families, and specifically young children with autism and related disabilities. So without further ado, Eileen, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, Daniel, thank you very much, and thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you to all of you that are here from wherever you are joining us. It's great to be with you. And I really wish that we could really have a true coffee chat, and that I could share these assortment of donuts with you. I just want to tell you I don't really have them in my office with me today. But hopefully one day we'll be able to meet and share coffee and donuts together. So my plan today is to spend about 30 minutes kind of highlighting how we've used building blocks to help us provide instruction to children with and without disabilities during this virtual educational time. And there are hopefully 4 things that we're going to talk about today. And then I'm going to leave lots of time to answer your questions. And the first is I'm going to talk briefly about a multi-tiered system of support. And then I'm going to talk about how this level of support can, this system can really support remote learning. I'm going to talk about how a multi-tiered system of support can help us individualize instruction, and then also how that can help us address progress monitoring, because that certainly is an issue for all of us, I know. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Building Blocks framework, but basically the Building Blocks framework is an example of a multi-tiered system of support for young children. So often in MTSS, or multi-tiered system of support, we're used to seeing 3 tiers, you know, the primary tier or universal, the secondary tier, and the tertiary tier. So we basically have named those tiers something different. So we start out by saying that every program needs to have a high quality every program for kids with disabilities needs to be based on a high quality early childhood program. And you know, another way of thinking about that is that that you can think about these tiers as being things that apply to all children, things that apply to some children, and things that apply to few children. And this high quality program needs to apply to all children. So what needs to be in that program to apply to all children? Then the next tier is if children are not making the kinds of gains that we expect to see, we can add some curricular modifications and adaptations. And one of my favorite ones to think about here, it's super simple, is in classrooms where children sit on mats during circle time. If you think about why we sit on a mat during circle time, or why we have children sit on a mat during circle time, it's to really show them where their space is, and to teach them how to sit without leaning into or rubbing up against or hitting a child next to them. And really what we've done there is modify the environment in a very simple way to teach that idea of your own space. So a simple modification, we can use that with many, many children, and we do it all the time, sometimes without even thinking about it. The third level is when we embed teaching opportunities to children who need a little bit more support. In that case, we may actually have an IEP objective to work on there, and we may be embedding specially designed instruction on that objective into the ongoing classroom routine and activities. And then the final tier, or what we sometimes would refer to as the third tier in a more traditionally named multi-tiered system of support, is a tier where we really specially design instruction to meet the needs of an individual child. So if we think about these tiers and how we think about supporting our families online, I'm going to show you what we've been doing at the Hearing Center. So basically, we've taken these tiers and we've said, okay, this is our framework for working with families. So the first thing is we think about what are the resources and policies that we have to support all families. And that's basically that bottom tier, you know, the bottom block. We need to be thinking about helping every family during this time. The second thing that we've been doing is thinking about positive intervention and supports for families. The third is thinking about curriculum content and curriculum. Fourth is how do we provide individualized instruction on that content and curriculum. And finally, implementation and progress monitoring. And again, I'm going to go through these briefly, and I'm happy to answer more questions at the end. So when we think about, you know, this again is for all families, creating and implementing resources and supports to think about all families, is making sure all of our families have met their basic needs, have their basic needs met, and if they don't, helping them find resources where they can get the needs that they help. Really focusing on building our inclusive community, making sure we're thinking about belonging and checking in on each other, and friendship and membership. And that has been a huge issue that we've been doing during this time. One of the things our teacher who runs toddler groups has been doing is 3 times a week she runs a snack group, and it's just bring a snack and we'll sit down and chat and have a story. And that has been probably the most popular thing she's done, because it's been a huge support in just building that community and having community for families and for children. Thinking about how we communicate effectively efficiently and with families, because every family that I know right now is having a challenge with this. At our weekly staff meetings, we spend a lot of time hearing about how schooling is going, and we hear as much from parents of typically developing children as we do of parents of children with of special needs. And finally, focusing on mental health. The very best blog I've read during this the pandemic was something I read early on called Maslow Before Bloom. And before we can worry about if children are having their educational needs met, we need to make sure that children and families are having their physical needs met. So if we can't get those things taken care of, then we're not going to get to education, and that goes for all families. Okay, our second tier in our multi-tiered system of support, and again, each tier that we build has to be strong. And the way that I think about this, and I always talk to my students about it, is each tier needs to have a strong foundation. You would never put a second floor on a building with a faulty foundation. Or the way that I like to think about it is that when you go to a restaurant in those days when we used to go to restaurants, and you get a table with a wobbly leg, no matter how many sugar packets you put under that leg, you're still worried when the soup comes because you don't have a strong foundation. If you don't have a strong foundation with tier 1, it doesn't matter how good tier 2 is, because you need to go back and support tier 1. So tier 2, assuming that we have that first tier shored up, is making sure that we help families think about positive behavior intervention and support at home. You know, we have to think about the challenging behaviors that we were dealing with at school. Those may or may not be the same behaviors that are important at home. They may not be occurring at home, and they may be appropriate at home. We don't know. So we have to talk with families about what are the issues that are important for them. We need to help families think about what the expectations and routines can be. In every popular press or social media post I've seen for families, they talk about schedules, and I think, yeah, we know how to do that. Schedules and visual supports, showing people, teaching people what we expect, and helping families do that. So helping families think about what is an appropriate time, what's an appropriate schedule for home, taking into consideration the demands on every member of the family. The third is that thing that we consider is content and curriculum. So what is the classroom curriculum? What are we trying to teach? Do families have the appropriate materials? If not, how are we helping them get those materials? When will the instruction take place? And just like we do in school, we think about the use of an activity matrix, and we have found these to be extremely useful for families to think about instruction at home. And I'm just going to show you an example of one. So if we think about an activity matrix and what it could look like, this is a child's activity matrix with all of the domains that they're working on across the top and the times at school across the side. And we might help a family fill those in and think about, okay, so when are you going to work on imitation? So could that be when we sit down for a story time after breakfast? Could it be when we're in the bathtub, when the child's in the bathtub? What could that be, and help them come up with the time that that works for them? Now we can also help people do that at child care if they're going to have more than one child that they're working with. And again, that's where we take the individual matrix and turn it into a matrix for the class, for multiple children in the class. The last tier, our fourth tier that we talk about in individualizing for virtual instruction is to think about how we can help students, we can help parents modify their environment, implement evidence-based practices at home. So really this idea of curriculum modification to me is one of the easiest things one of the most effective things that we can do with families. When we think about curricular modification and we talk about it in the Building Blocks book, we talk about it as something that you get a big impact for not so much effort. And so thinking about creating an environment that is going to help children be more effective at home. So for example, one issue would be how you set up a play or work environment for the child. We know that children are going to be more more on task if they have the materials that they need in front of them. How can we set that up? Do we think about a schedule that is similar to the one that they use at school that lists things that they need to do? Can we use simple things like a first then chart? So first you need to work on a math program, and then you can have time to go outside and play. First, you need to work on listening to a story on Zoom, and then you can play on an app that you choose. So this whole idea of thinking about how we can modify the environment. If we have parents who are going to provide instruction, we can use some of the forms that are in Building Blocks. There's a wonderful form called IEP at a Glance that really breaks down instruction into very simple steps that include things that as easy as what is the teacher, what is the adult going to say, what do we expect the child to say? So those are things that we can fill out and send home to the families. But we always want to couch that by saying that we do that if the family is ready for that, if they want us to do that. For some families, that's too much, and we have to always meet the families where they are. So the top of our pyramid in thinking about how we're going to work with families virtually is to really help them help us collect data, help them help us set learning and IEP goals, and how to make a plan for instruction and implementation. So when the pandemic first started and schools closed, I talked to one of my colleagues who I think is about the wisest woman I know, and she happens to have a son with autism. And she said to me that if it were up to her, every IEP meeting would now begin with the question, what do you wish your child knew when this pandemic started? What skills do you wish your child had? And I think that that's such a powerful question, because what that allows us to do is to remember that the I in the IEP means individualized, and that we have to really help families redefine functional skills in this whole new way. If we think about what it means to teach functional skills, a functional skill is a skill that if the child can't do it, someone has to do it for the child. And and that idea of functional skills has been redefined when we think about the pandemic, because the ability to play independently, to spend time without constant supervision, to potentially increase your self-care skills in terms of making yourself a snack, getting yourself a drink, participating in a group with your siblings or other people in your home. All of those things have really increased, and we have to acknowledge those in our IEP, our IEPs and instructional plans. But at the same time, we know that we have to take data. So we think about how we can take data. And so this is something that we've really thought about doing, is that, if we're thinking about, again, going back to our 4 levels of the building blocks framework, and we think about things that that apply to all children, and so those might be things that are covered over by a general developmental curriculum like the TS Gold or the AEPS, that we might collect data on those things 2 or 3 times a year. And we have backed way off on that this year, just because it's impossible for us to collect as much data as we'd like to. But we don't need to collect data on those very often. If we think about things that are going to be covered by a curriculum modification, such as another one of my favorite curriculum modifications is if I'm having a child work on a task at a table with other children and they grab other kids' materials, I'll have them work on a tray or a placemat, so that they learn what's on the tray or the placemat is theirs, and if it's not on the tray or on their tray or placemat, they have to ask for it. I can check in on that skill monthly. I don't need to really get data on that more than monthly. If I'm doing something where I'm embedding instruction, maybe I need to do instruction on that. I need to collect data on that weekly. But if I'm doing something where I am providing specially designed instruction, explicit direct instruction, I still want to try and get daily data. But how can I possibly get daily data from families? So here's a way that we've thought about doing it. So if we think about changing our how we think about goals, so rather than having and this form comes from the data project manual that is also published by Brooks, is rather than taking a goal where we still have the domain of communication, but we simplify that goal to say we're still interested in increasing the number and length of comments my child makes, the number of comments children makes, but now we're going to think about it with family members. And the target behavior is, of course, answering questions that parents and siblings ask. And then we're going to have specific instructions. So use picture prompts during informal interactions. For example, we have a project that we call an intervention that we call Snack Talk, where we'll have an 8 by 11 piece of paper that has pictures of places that you've been or books that you like, and use it to prompt communications. And then we'll ask, we can ask parents to just use the 0, 1, 2 rating to give us feedback on on the child's performance. And that will, again, with 0 being the child doesn't do it at all or needs complete assistance. 1 is the child is doing some but still needs help, and 2, that the child's acquired it. Again, it's not as the kind of data that many of us are used to, and where we're looking at number of trials correct out of 10, but it's giving us data and it's allowing us to communicate with the parent about the changes that they see. So I hope this has been helpful. This is a challenging time for all of us. We're all pioneers in this because no one's ever done this before, and we're all learning from each other. But what I like to say to the teachers that I work with is this: good instruction is still good instruction. We may need to change our expectations and what can be done on a day-to-day basis, but we still know how to do good instruction. And we have to think about what's most important to families and how we work with families. But using a multi-tiered system of support like the building blocks framework is going to be your key to meeting the needs of all children during this time. And at that, I guess I'd like to turn it over to questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation, Eileen. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and type those into the questions tab of the webinar panel, and we'll take those. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just looking here. Looks like we may be getting some questions in. So we did have a listener that said that they really like the idea of learning in their own space with the mask. Can make it a lot less scary for the children.
You know, one of the things we've been doing, Daniel, is we've been, there's, questions that we've been getting about how do you work on skills where children are interacting with each other. And, we've worked on setting up Zoom conversations between children. And in a way, if we can, if we have the people who are available to set up the technology, the Zoom conversations between peers has actually been remarkably successful. And I think because it does limit some of the hard part about peer-to-peer conversation, especially for kids with autism or kids with the significant disabilities, it limits, where do I need to look? Well, there's kind of a beeping green light that shows you where to look. I can even put visual supports up on the screen for you to look at while you're interacting with a peer. And it has really nice generalization because we can practice it with grandparents and siblings and aunts and uncles and other family members who may be available to the children on Zoom as well.
Yeah, we just had a listener that said they love the idea of virtual play dates and said their own children amaze them in their creativity with playing with friends via FaceTime.
Yeah.
Let's see. So we have a listener that is asking, do you have any visuals or video examples of the snack talk? Or could you further describe the snack talk?
Sure. There's actually a article in YEC by Ariane Gavreau about snack talk, and I didn't put anything in my in the slide about it, but I'm happy to send it along to Daniel. I don't know how to do that on the fly here, so but I can send a copy of that article. But I know it was published in YEC, and it's a wonderful strategy. We've also done a DEC webinar. They don't call them webinars. They call them something else. And on using visual supports, and we talked about that, and I assume that those are cataloged somewhere. But I'm happy to send you the article, or can I send it to you, Daniel, or how is the best way to do that? Okay.
Yeah, you can send it to me, and I'll include a link in it in the follow-up email that'll go out to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Let's see here. We have another listener who is asking, when you are supporting children or families at home, are you mostly coaching the parents, or do you interact with the child too?
It depends on the child and the family. We try to interact with the child as much as we can, but we also want to support the family, and so part of it depends on what the family wants. One of the things that the first step in in working with every family is to figure out the best way that we can support them to support their child's education. Because the reality is that, especially for young children, they're not going to be on Zoom without parental support. It just isn't reality. And so, adults are the secret sauce to make this work. And so we have to think about what's going to be best for the family. So sometimes we will demonstrate ways to do things with Zoom. Sometimes we will watch parents interact and coach the family. But it really depends on what's going to work out best for the child and parent. And most often it's a mix of all of those things.
Let's see. We have a few listeners that are asking about more information about the IEP at a glance that you had mentioned, and if you could tell them where to locate that document as well.
So that document is in the Building Blocks book, and I'm looking to see if I have a copy, which is embarrassing that I don't have a copy. Oh, here it is. And I have to find it. I'm sorry that I don't have it tabbed. And it's actually called Instruction at a Glance, and it's on page 155 of the Building Blocks of the Building Blocks book. And then there's also another one called ELO at a Glance, and it's on page 143. And both of those will be really helpful to you in providing that instruction.
Great, thank you, Eileen. Let's see. So we have a listener that was asking, how often and how long do you recommend your sessions be with families?
Well, again, I think it depends on what the activity is and on the different families, because again, each family is going to have different needs. I think more than a half an hour is unrealistic to maintain the kind of attention that you need to do this work. I know that my first week of Zooming, I thought on that weekend I was going to I couldn't really get off the couch. I was exhausted. And being on Zoom and being intense on Zoom and only paying attention to what's going on Zoom it is very, very exhausting. So I think if you can get a half an hour, that's great. But you may not be able to start out with a half an hour. Depending on the children and the family, that may be way too long, and depending on what you're trying to do. So if I'm trying to interact with a child and the adult, and if the child I can interact with them for a few minutes and then they're doing something else. If that isn't possible, then that parent may not be available. So I have to think about, both what they can do and what works for them, because at the same time, parents have other demands on their time besides being available for me to provide coaching on Zoom. They may have demands with their other children. They may be working. They may, there may be a lot of other things going on. So I think it's a collaborative process, but I think if I could work up to a half an hour, that would be ideal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I also think that this is a time where, one of the great thing about preschool teachers is that we are good with visual supports. We are good with schedules and visual supports. And this is a time where we should be using those, because, the more guidance that we can provide for families on how to do those things, we know that they're helpful. We know that helping someone even do simple things like, how to decide what you're going to do in the morning, so whether it's what the schedule is going to look like, do you want to have the same routine every day, or do you want to every morning set up a different routine? That's going to depend somewhat on the family and the child, but either way, we have strategies that we can use, that we know how to use, that can help the family be successful to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It seems now, especially more than ever, that visual supports are, really becoming much more useful and helpful in working with families. Let's see. We have another listener who is asking, what do you hope continues about virtual learning after the pandemic is over? Are there any parts that you hope teachers continue to do when in-person learning begins again?
I was just talking about this with some graduate students before this meeting. So one of them are meetings. Like, I hope that I never have to go to another in-person faculty meeting. As a faculty member, I hope that we can do them all on Zoom. That would be fabulous. But I do think that there are some things that we can do, like stories, story hours. I think that those are really fabulous. But I think it depends a lot on the age and ability of the child. I think for older kids, I think that there's a lot about this that about virtual learning that can be we can take on, we can continue, but I do worry about younger children not having the space to interact and move that they get in a real classroom. So I think things like meetings are great. Think about how easy parent conferences would be, how much maybe more participation we could do with parent conferences if we could use Zoom, how much time we would save. We just ran a 16-week parent support group that was all on Zoom. That was probably the most successful one we've ever run. We ran it over the summer, and it was in the evenings in the summer, and we had 100% attendance. And I just think because people could log on from wherever they were, and that made a huge difference. So I think that there are some things that I hope that we continue doing on Zoom, but I also think that, especially with young children, when we know that social communication is such a big part of our curriculum, that that really needs to be person to person, live.
Yeah. It's really interesting about the parent support group.
Yeah, that it was and the parents loved it. I mean, the feedback we received from the parents was uniformly positive, and the parents really bonded with each other. They set up networks that they have continued to use, and that's been fantastic. But so I don't think we need to do that person to person, face to face. That doesn't really make it, there's no reason to do it face to face. It doesn't make it easier. But there are other things that I think really do need to be face to face. So, and I think we will continue to, at the end of when we're all back in school, it will be interesting to see how we, both how we think about, rebuilding our community, because, what we've learned, I think, from remote instruction as well, is that everyone is good at some things, and everyone has areas in which they need improvement. And so the importance of universal design has been highlighted, and hopefully we'll be able to take some of those lessons back into the classroom.
The tray placemat idea as a modification idea. But do you have any similar ideas that could be used for the green level?
So the green level is curriculum modification, and so I think there are all kinds of areas there. So one is helping, always like, again, I know I sound like a broken record with schedules, but helping kids understand what's expected in different areas. That's an area where timers are super helpful. How long do I need to do this? How many of something do I need to do? Another, simple things like, making sure that children can reach where they're sitting. I think of my own environmental modifications that I've done since I started working at home. When we started this, I was working at the dining room table. Like a month into that, I bought an office chair because sitting at my dining room chair for 8 hours a day was like just killed me. Now I've remodeled or I bought a desk and moved it into a guest room, so I actually have a desk, and things are much better so that I have a designated workspace. So, and that's just for me, and I'm a pretty, competent adult. So I think about that for a child as well. So how does my environment help to tell children what's expected and what's not expected, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? We do that in classrooms all the time, that we have rules and expectations. This is the expectation at this time of the day. This is the expectation at this time of the day. And how do we do that at home? Well, it's hard because there may be part of the day at home that is work and school, and part of the day at home that is home. And, do we need to do simple things like saying, when I have the red flag up or the green flag up, that it's school time, and when I put up the flag with the letter of our last name, that means it's home time, and we know that there are different rules during that time. But really indicating those, making things as concrete as we can. One of the things that I say to our teachers a lot is that with young children, and especially young children with autism, that we're trying to make the abstract concrete. That there are all these kind of unknown rules and expectations and things that are unsaid but assumed, and I'm trying to make those as concrete and visible as possible.
Yeah. Let's see. We have another listener. I think you mentioned it a little bit, or you talked a little bit about it as well, with time of sessions. But we had a listener that was asking if you could talk a bit more about meeting families where they are.
Well, I think that families tell us if we're meeting them where they are, and they sometimes do that by not participating or not showing up, or and in the past, I think we've said that was the fault of the family, and I think what we have to realize is that that's the fault of the instruction. And so if we think about instruction and partnering with families in the same way we think about instruction. So I think about instruction by saying that student failure is instructional failure. If a child is not making the gains I want them to make, then I need to change the instruction. If parents aren't participating in the way that I would like to see that, then I need to change what I'm doing, which might include my expectations for the family. So I think the first thing is that we do with every family is ask them what their priorities are, and how we can work with them in a way that works for them. So, you know, if you look at the child's IEP and we say, what on this IEP is the most important thing to you and what do you want to work on? And go back to what I think needs to be our guiding question during virtual instruction, which is, what can we help your child learn that will make him or her happier and more independent at home? And I think those are going to be the most important things right now. So I think when we ask those kind of questions as well, that we demonstrate that we're here as a team member and we're not using, you know, kind of the expert-driven model of saying, this is what we know your child needs to learn, but rather we're saying, how can we help you help your child be most successful? And you know, who knows? You know, maybe that approach will be hopefully will be another carryover from virtual instruction, and that we'll have this that kind of approach in instructional planning as we move forward.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that was all of the questions that have been submitted. So I think we'll move on then from our Q&A session. So thank you to everyone that submitted questions. And if you have any outstanding questions that you think of towards the end of the webinar, again, there's a survey that'll pop up, and I think there will be a chance for you to enter any questions that may pop into your head once the webinar is over. Okay, so there's just a few other closing slides that we have. If you could go to the next slide, Eileen. So certificates of attendance are available to all viewers. You can download it either from the handout section. The certificate is available for download there, or you can go to this URL here on your screen and you can download your certificate from there as well. And there will be information for getting your certificate again in the follow-up email that you'll receive tomorrow afternoon as well. And if you could go to the next slide, Eileen. And again, we'll also have that, we'll be having that webinar survey. So just let us know what you thought about this webinar and you'll be entered to win a free copy of Building Blocks 3rd edition. And we are extending a discount offer to all attendees at brookspublishing.com. So you can use the code COFFEECHAT at checkout and save 20% on most Brooks products. And if you don't get a chance to write these down, again, the slides are available for download in the handout section, so you can pull the discount code from there as well. And if you're looking for more professional development opportunities, we have tons of coffee chats from our last series from the spring, and we also have upcoming coffee chats as well. So all of our coffee chats are recorded, so you can watch older sessions or you can register for upcoming sessions as well. And you can go to bit.ly/Brooks Coffee Chats, and you'll find our full schedule there and all of our recorded sessions as well. And we also have a large number of COVID-19 resources that we've put together for early childhood educators. These include recommended readings, downloadable resources, and other professional development webinars outside of our Coffee Chat series. So if you go to bpub.fyi/COVID-EC, that is case sensitive, that'll take you to our COVID-19 resources page. And we've just put that together. Oh, Eileen, your calendar popped up.
I know, sorry about that. I don't know how to. Sorry about that.
Nope, no worries. So yeah, if you are looking for additional resources to support you during this pandemic, we've put together a lot of resources that we think can help early childhood educators and support their work with young children and families. And with that, I would just like to say another thank you to all of our attendees today. Thank you for supporting our Coffee Chat series and submitting questions. And I'd like to say a huge thank you again to Eileen for presenting this fantastic webinar today. So To all of you, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you again, Eileen.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. And I will send you that resource about snack talk.
Yes, yep, and I'll include that. That'll be in the follow-up email that everyone will receive tomorrow. All right, well, thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.